Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. My name is Sarah Jones, and today the case study topic that I'm going to be presenting to you is on the misrepresentation of various ethnic groups in the U.S. entertainment television industry. So let's do this now. Share. Great. So first, the broad ethics dilemma is that entertainment television in the U.S. leans strongly towards entertaining a white audience. Shows entirely exclude minority perspective or grossly misrepresent minority perspectives by including token characters of color, which are often associated with offensive stereotypes. The relevance of this issue is that television is something that we watch every day. It influences our everyday lives greatly. And so racial representation and inclusivity should be the standard across of all of the components that go into generating it. Not only represented on TV, but represented along every process of the content creation. Historically, it has not been equal, and while the industry may look to be slowly improving, the inequality is still grossly overwhelming. So the overview of the study is that the case study seeks to discover how lack of industry misrepresentation negatively influences the general public's view on minority groups, as well as influences minority individuals' self-perception. It will focus on the misrepresentation of numerous ethnic communities in American television, although research for this is limited, as typically the only ethnic groups that there is a large enough population sample are African American and Hispanic groups. It will interpret how the individual affected parties are being targeted and suggest solutions. So first, our question is television racially imbalanced? These findings concur, yes, overwhelmingly. My first case study looked at primetime entertainment media and analyzed it for the quality of appearance and the type of discourse or interaction between different people of racial and ethnic identity groups. So what the analysis revealed is that in primetime television, white characters appeared in 97% of their interactions, followed by black characters who appeared in 24% of the interpersonal interactions, and all of the other groups were pretty represented pretty smallly, around 5%. And so what this is really calculating for is the type of interaction. So is it a personal interaction? Is it a love interaction? Or is it meeting a stranger in public type interaction and possibly a coworker interaction? So these inter-REI interactions frequently consisted of power differentials. And for the most part, it really wasn't personal interactions. It really was that with a coworker or out in a group of people with a lot of strangers around is when there was likely to be more interaction between people of different races on television. So in sum, is basically what it says right here. People of different REI groups on television interact with one another in the public spheres of life, but much less often in private, intimate ways. And why does this matter? This matters because broadcast television has the capacity to be a valuable source of experiential information regarding social interaction, and it influences our perceptions on the real life. So definitely important here. My second study is investigating, again, primetime television, but instead asking African American and Latinos to analyze their perceptions toward it. So they're responding to, on a 0 to 100 positive to negative scale, whether they have a positive perception of that particular content that they're watching or they have a negative connotation. And then they are also rating their perceptions towards the dominant or empowered group, which is 9 times out of 10 the white population. So this longitudinal national level study did a really good job of putting into perspective the Black and Latino representation on TV, both in the past and today. And unfortunately and unshockingly, perceptions are not good. It is found that, for the most part, when Black people are seen on television, they're less likely to be seen in positions of leadership or perhaps like occupations such as a doctor, and they're more likely to be found in blue-collar positions or as women, to be seen as criminals or to be sexually promiscuous. And among the Latino ethnic group, Portrayals of Latinos are pretty unfavorable and actually grossly underrepresented, as they are the second largest ethnic group in the US and they are seen very frequently on television. As a matter of fact, the Black population is sort of the token minority and is overused disproportionately. In the retrospect, Latinos are misrepresented very much lower to what their actual real life representation would be. And Latinos were characterized as unprofessional, as crooks, to be associated with like lazy or unintelligent characteristics, which is really unfair. At the end, it says consistently for both Blacks and Latinos, negative representations of one's own group reduced warm feeling towards their in-group, and favorable characteristics contributed to feelings of worth. So people do feel the way that it is perceived, and that is important to note. The pattern of this result draws attention to the negative media representations that might pose an identity threat to ethnic minorities. And although this is something that has been under the microscope as of lately, it is a continuous issue that just keeps going on and on and on. This is important because it really highlights the fact that what we see in the media can really influence our real life perception on ourselves and perceptions on other people. And I like the last line. These results suggest that when the content of mass media is left to be shaped by market forces, those groups with lower economic and political power who are likely to need empowerment the most are the least likely to have their needs met. So this third article has to do with race representation in child television targeted commercials. And little to no surprise, this one pretty much says the same thing, that in advertisements that are targeted specifically towards children, nearly 75% of the characters were white. African Americans made up nearly 20% of the primary characters, and Latino and Asian American and other people of different descents characterized for around 2 to 1%. So just, again, grossly low. When considering who are the people who have speaking roles, it's mostly white. These statistics are very biased, and it's really evident that the types of roles that children are given include bias in them. So you can see here African Americans are really cast in this spokesperson role, and other racial minorities never serve this function. That also kind of goes into what sort of roles are assigned to people of different races. So, for example, African Americans are much more frequently cast as athletes or musicians. Latinos are, strangely enough, cast to be in fast food restaurant advertisements. Over 95% of all Latino primary characters are found in this category, which was supposedly a very small sample size of commercials. So, obviously typecasted there and profiled. Asian Americans are too strongly typecasted, and they are typecasted to be in high technology products. This research study also pointed out that Asian American people are only included in advertisements on television as children. So age makes a really big difference for the study as well. At the very end, it kind of goes into like why this is bad if it's not obvious enough. And it's bad because it goes along into the model minority stereotype, which is a false flatterer. Basically, it says these people are good at this and they can only do this. So we need some more expansive options in the roles that minorities can play in television and in commercial advertising. This article analyzes 3 reality TV shows: MTV's Real World, Denver's CBS Survivor, and the Black White Show. This show positions race as a point of contention among the cast, and it really dramatizes racial tensions among people of color. It allows for personalization of certain issues, and really the show is just not good at all in, for lack of a better word, understanding racial tensions well. It is a really simplistic, really dramatized reality TV fix, and it's really not that good. So you can see here at the bottom, it goes on. The narratives about race on these shows can be understood as similar in 5 prevailing ways how race is mediated in television news. They dramatize race and racial issues by juxtaposing opposing viewpoints, promote conflict in the framing of race and racial issues, specifically in terms of racial and interracial conflict, perpetuate hegemonic representations of race by emphasizing violence and anger, personalize racism by privileging individual solutions to complex social problems. That one's the biggest, in my opinion. And leave conflict and contradictions unresolved. So this really is for entertainment and does nothing to spur forward social progress. So now we're going to apply the ethical decision-making process. First, we gather the facts. Basically, to sum all of those up, representation in the American TV industry is disproportionate. White people are grossly overrepresented. Black people are the second highest representation. They make up for about 40% of the representation within television, although that is actually larger than their real world percentage in America. Latinos are actually the second largest race in the US, and they are represented at about half of their proportion and almost always associated with a negative stereotype. All the rest of the ethnicities, there is barely even enough information to analyze them. They are pretty much invisible among primetime television, and they need more representation. So now we're going to define the ethical issues. And I think this is important because for many people, watching TV isn't just watching TV. Watching TV, whether you realize it or not, you're subconsciously making assumptions and creating schemas in your head, and you do influence your perception on the real world. For those who don't live in a diverse area, how certain races are portrayed on television is how people perceive them in real life, so it's certainly important to perceive each group in fair and reasonable and just ways. For the minorities being perceived, especially those who, like younger children, may not have critical thinking skills to classify these representations as misrepresentations that are false and offensive. Negative portrayals and typecasted characters can influence the way that they believe themselves and their own culture, and they can influence them in a negative way, which we certainly do not want. Reversely positive portrayals of ethnic groups create feelings of pride and appreciation of one's self-identity, so it is important to have that representation among the television industry. Ethically speaking, I believe that the television providers, directors, writers, etc., should want every American of every ethnicity to feel accurately represented. Proportionally, this is not a historically good thing that they have done. It's the American television industry actually has a long history of casual racism and bias. Even after receiving criticism, television shows seem to have taken that and spun around and included just a couple Black people with every group and called that racial inclusion, when in reality it is very much still a white-dominated industry, and this is unjust. So I've identified the stakeholders here as the people sort of in charge of the production and the consumers. Really all consumers, everyone who watches TV, but specifically American minorities who have been continuously targeted or excluded in numerous forms from an unfavorable light. Some of the consequences of the stakeholders, let's say if they decide to include new minority perspectives, is short positive consequences. Perhaps they receive new viewership from new people groups. Long term is, again, new viewership and perhaps positive ratings for people who really enjoy the new perspectives. Negative consequences, immediate news backlash, people saying, what's all this, and everything's fair already. Long perhaps would not fare well with the majorly white American population, because very many people, and I feel like in the general public, do get offended by the idea that our nation has a racist past, and it's just something that we try to brush over. So certainly the news attention would cause some spark and some uprisal. As for the television consumers, the positive short consequences are new shows, new narratives for people to enjoy. Long positive consequences are positive self-representation and positive group identity image. Negative consequences, there might be some uprisals of racism because people are upset about the new sparked media attention. Some shows may not resonate with the viewers. Some long-term effects are that More shows about the minority perspective allows the possibility for more representation and racial bias to occur. So here are just a couple obligations that I came up with. People who provide entertainment have a social responsibility to make sure they are not being racist to their broadcasts, whoever they kind of are, because they're misrepresenting people disproportionately and being pretty free using with the stereotypes, because stereotypes are a free, easy excuse to write television that people can know and understand, which is just wrong. We need to do better. Secondly, we have an obligation to make sure that people of color are represented along every level of the creation progress, to make sure that races are represented proportionally and are not limited to type-based roles. Advertising towards children should hold positive connotation for children of every race, and roles should be carefully balanced so that everybody has speaking roles. These things are not somehow accidentally biased. We should be cognizant of everything. Racial inclusion should be a priority up to company leadership, so the people who are making decisions. Diverse writers should be allowed more opportunities to create shows from varying non-white perspectives. Race should be viewed as a homogenic issue, as it is typically is in society. People don't fit into one category or the other. We need to move past skin color and understand the relevance of every aspect of an individual's background as meaningful and important. So not just putting people on TV because they look to be a certain color, really understanding racial diversity in a more complex and evolved understanding. And finally, because TV is one of the most universal forms of communication among Americans, it is the ethical responsibility of the television industry to drive forward progress. So I think those are all pretty good obligations. Moving along, I think it's a no-brainer that the entertainment media deals poorly with matters of race. It's important that our nation becomes more racially aware, understanding, inclusive, and evolved. I believe that people in charge have an ethical responsibility to make sure that people are not being unfairly represented or not represented at all. All television audiences are not white in America, therefore all television actors should not be white. However, most of them are. And I think that children want to see people of their race in positions of power, leadership, influence, creativity. And instead, they are widely stereotyped in negative perceptions that either sexualizes them or puts them down in some form of way. And I really think that the future children of the world and TV audiences deserve better. Potential actions to take against this are: we can hire more writers of color. We can make sure that the casting team is diverse. We can review the script for speaking roles and make sure that speaking roles are evenly proportioned out and that they do not just belong to white actors. Also, television viewers should be more cognizant of the bias in television and teach their children to be aware of it as well. Diversity training among television industry staff could help, also, as well as the encouragement of new voices in the media. Check my gut. Gut intuition is that people of color would probably appreciate more representation in the media, especially on primetime channels. I think it would also allow for white audiences to have a better understanding of other ethnicities, cultures, and how things may differ among them. And that the current industry standard is bad, bad, bad. We need to improve. The proper ethical action, in my opinion, is to first consider the older shows that still air on the network, determine from a modern day perspective whether they're racist or not, and if the answer is yes, remove them. Then more diverse staff should be hired onto television sets and be directly involved with the creation decisions of the show. That shows should also critically evaluate their shows for stereotypes before releasing new episodes, and that actors should also play a part by being aware of playing roles that could be considered offensive. Thank you very much for watching my presentation, and I look forward to responding to your comments. I hope you all have a good night. Thank you.